Breaking the gray.
Sarah, ever since we added video to Rebel Scientist to the podcast, I actually have to be conscious like that I actually have done something with my hair and that I wear more colors because I realized that I only wear dark blue and black, and having a dark blue wall behind me means I'm just a floating head. So today I
Yeah.
decided I was going to lighten up the blue and do a little more blue.
So
And
you
you're wearing,
decided to wear blue
yeah,
again.
I decided to, I guess I default to blue. I don't know what, I'm sure somewhere someone knows what that means with my aura and everything, but I like
Bet
wearing
you've
blue.
got colourful pajamas on the bottom, though.
Yes,
You've got
absolutely.
Mr. Man pajamas on the bottom, I bet.
Giant socks. It's freezing here today. It's in the 50s. So
Work
you
on
know
the
how
top, party on the bottom.
exactly. That's how it goes.
Yeah,
That's how it goes.
yeah.
Sarah, we have an amazing guest today, and I want to jump right into because we have a lot of great stuff to get through. So why don't we go through intros and introduce our great guests?
Yeah, we've got Brooke Ansley, and now I'm a master at murdering everybody's name, so you have to excuse me, Brooke. Yes,
You did great. You did great.
Yes, because I do it every single time. But it's lovely to have you on. You're not from our little black book, so it's great to have someone on that's new to us. And we don't so much talk about the mind, because we're kind of a biohacking podcast. We cover a lot of stuff about the body. We do a lot of supplements. We do a lot of other things. We have done some stuff about energy work, but we really talk about the mind. And I know your speciality is the kind of the subconscious mind. So it's nice for us to kind of have that change. So thank you for coming on. We're really excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you for having me. And exactly what you said, Sarah. I think a lot of times when it comes to health, people don't realize how much the mind, that mind-body connection is such an integral piece, and mindset impacting our behavior and our ability to actually create change in our life. So it does kind of fit the biohacking world really well, because a lot of what you guys talk about is creating change in your life, creating behavior change. But I think a lot of, clients that I talk to, it's like, okay, well, how do I actually start implementing some of these healthier changes in my life? And that's where hypnotherapy comes in, which is really cool.
Yes,
the behavior hacking tool.
And again, that's why I was extra interested in having you on the show, because it's an actual technique to help people address their subconscious mind. Because I think we all have heard of the mind-body connection and everybody's very aware of that. But actually having a tool that enables you to access that, I think that's why it's so interesting. I'm saying I haven't had hypnosis. I think I did once when I was in my 20s have hypnosis for something. But again, it's not kind of so much of a biohacker thing, we're more about, there's a lot of stuff about journaling and gratitude and maybe kind of set that positive mindset. So maybe you can tell us a bit about what hypnosis is, because I'm sure we've all gone to those dodgy pub hypnosis, or maybe that's an England thing where they make you eat an onion or walk around like chicken or do something awful.
It does happen here. It happens in shows. It happens in Vegas. But this is very different. So one thing to understand that I think a lot of people don't realize is that hypnosis actually happens daily. We go in and out of hypnosis every single day naturally. So hypnosis is just alpha theta brainwave state. And when you're in alpha theta brainwave state, the critical area of the mind, that left brain, that part of the mind that's kind of telling you who you are, where you've been, what you're capable of, your identity, your inner self-talk, your logic, your reasoning, your willpower, that side of the brain is less active. And that critical mind acts as a filter, and it kind of separates your conscious mind from your subconscious. And for example, if you're in a deep sleep at night, you're in delta brainwave state. And as you start to wake up in the morning, you move through theta and then alpha. And then when you're alert and awake, you're in beta brainwave state. So hypnosis is in that alpha theta, like somewhere in between, that twilight hour before you fall asleep at night. If you've ever been like, you're laying in bed and you're awake, you're not fully asleep, but you're not fully alert. That is the state of hypnosis. It also happens like if you've ever been entranced in like a really great movie, like you feel emotionally like you're part of the movie, or a really great book. We call it entranced because you're in a trance, you're in hypnosis. So it's important that we know this, because when you're in a state of hypnosis, that critical mind, it's great for us. It helps us survive. It's part of our survival, but also it keeps us limited based on our belief systems. But when that critical mind is relaxed, you're in a heightened state of suggestibility. You're taking in information. And so every morning for about 30 minutes after you wake up and 30 minutes before you go to sleep at night, you're already in hypnosis. So you want to think about, what am I watching on TV? Am I turning on the news? Am I looking at social media as soon as I wake up in the morning? Because whatever you are turning your attention to at that hour, you're taking that information in without a filter, without a critical filter.
That makes a lot of sense. And I try to screenwrite on as a side thing that I do, and I tend to wake up from a dream, and that's where I get a screen idea or a scene idea or a character idea. And I'm sure a lot of it is what I went to bed watching or went to bed thinking. But when I'm in the middle of writing a script, I am so involved in having a conversation with fake people that do not exist. And when I go to bed, I dream about it. And I'm like, and that's why Sarah and I have focused a lot on sleep lately in a lot of these episodes,
Yes.
is because I have cherished my sleep so I can actually dream, and actually it's part of my creative process. But I, I'm curious about that though. Like, is, sleeping and dreaming being separate, because that's a whole different episode. But let's talk about sort of what you put into your brain, and how that impacts this. Because Sarah and I have also talked to people that talk, a lot about, junk music going into your body and junk things going into your brain. How does that get processed in
Yeah,
and out
or
of this
junk
information?
TV,
Yeah,
actually. I am
or just
hyper
TV. Yeah.
aware of the shows that I watch now before I go to bed, which is something that shifted when I started getting into this work. So, Russ, what you're talking about is that flow state. So, a lot of athletes and artists talk about flow state. Actually, I don't know if you can see there's guitar behind me. I'm a songwriter in another life. I still do some, but what you're discussing is flow state. That is that alpha brainwave state, which is part of hypnosis, and why it's so creative is because the critical mind is less active. That critical mind keeps us in accordance. It filters our perception and our behavior based on our belief systems. And most of our belief systems were established at a very young age, and most of them are very limited beliefs. And the way this comes into play with health and wellness is, there's certain belief systems that, first of all, you've got cultural conditioning, what we say to ourselves every day about our bodies, what we believe our capabilities are, when it comes to movement and exercise. So like one thing I see a lot is people saying, well, I never played sports. I'm not coordinated. Therefore, like, I don't go to the gym and I don't like to work out, right? That's a belief system. And when you shift that belief system, you actually change your behavior when it comes to incorporating movement. Or all or nothing thinking is a really big one. I actually, I listened to your podcast, and Russ, you were talking about movement in another podcast with the biohacker babes, when you were talking about movement and how so many people have these beliefs of like what movement or exercise needs to be in order to be beneficial. So what the majority of the population does is they throw the baby out with the bathwater. They're like, well, if I can't get an hour in and I'm not going to really over intensely work out my body, then I'm just not going to move at all. And when in fact, there's growing research showing that over exercising and burning your body out, especially as a woman, is not good for your body. It's not good for weight loss. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your hormones. And so when we shift some of these belief systems at the subconscious level, these are really deeply ingrained. To kind of back it up for a second, 90% of our behavior is habitual. And also 90% of our mind is subconscious, unconscious behaviors. And that also goes for your inner self-talk, what you're saying to yourself every single day, the way you talk to yourself. You're having these thoughts every day, and they're impacting your perception and your behavior. So your willpower lives in the conscious mind. 10% of your mind is conscious. So when you're relying on willpower, you're using only 10% of the mind.
Yeah, it's so interesting. My inside voice sounds a lot like my dad when I was about 6 years old, and the thing that he kept saying to me, and there's something really interesting, and we have talked a lot about this, but and having gone through a lot of therapy too, I'm understanding why, because I think it's such an important thing that gets missed. Like, why do you act that way? Why do I put those blockers up? Why do I sabotage myself? Why do I talk that way to myself? And I think to get to the bottom of it, if you understand why, then you can resolve it. So with hypnosis, are you Are you trying to identify the why, or are you trying to help them establish ways to address the way they act because of the why?
Two things. So first is we just have to build awareness, right? So we just have to become aware. And usually just by realizing that there's belief systems in place that are limiting you, or there's a voice. And by the way, what you just hit the nail on the head, Russ. Most people, the internal self-talk we develop at a young age, and it's usually someone else's voice that we've internalized. And so first we have to just know that it's there, and then we can start to create change. So we talked about the critical mind earlier. As kids, we don't develop a critical mind until around the age of 8. So like that's when kids start discerning, like they stop believing in Santa Claus and the tooth fairy, because they're like, wait a second, that doesn't
Can
really
I just
make
say
sense.
one thing, Brooke? Here, my daughter still listens to the podcast. There is a Santa Claus. She's 11, and she
Yes,
dreams and she believes still, even though she probably knows full well. But I will never say it out loud. But just so we know, there is a Santa
yes,
Claus,
there
and his
is.
name,
Yes.
his name is Russ, and his wife is Jess, and they buy
Mhm.
gifts for
Mhm.
Teddy. But
Yes.
we will still play along. Sorry, keep
Yes.
going.
So Star Wars, for example, like the Ewoks in Star Wars, that's another one. Like whether or not those are real, like as I got to be older, I started to say, wait a second, is this, we'll take it to Star Wars for that example. But around the age of 8 is when kids start being like, wait a second, they start developing this critical area of the mind. And that's when you start solidifying. So a lot of what we believe and the internal self-talk we have, we're little sponges before that, and it becomes solidified around that age. So it's really critical at that time what we're taking in and what we're experiencing in our environment, what we're seeing, the patterns we're seeing in our family patterns, family conditions. And by the way, we're not placing blame on parents, because we're all just humans. It's just important that we become aware of how this is internalized in subconscious mind, so that we can then start to break those patterns, right? So we establish at a very young age these knowns. Who am I? That internal self-talk, whether it's, you're talking kindly to yourself or you're talking unkindly to yourself, your relationship to your body, your beliefs about your ability to make, these are not just with health, it's with relationships, money, all of these belief systems. A big one is your relationship to food and sugar. So a lot of us have been raised with this idea of sugar as a reward. And you skin your knee, or you have a bad day at school, and you come home and mom or dad says, it's okay, honey, don't cry, you've been so brave. Let's go get ice cream and it's all going to be okay, right? Or don't cry, here, have a cupcake, right? So we start learning at a very young age, food and sugar is an appropriate response to an emotional need. That's a subconscious belief that gets kind of locked in. And then that critical mind begins to filter our perception and our behavior as adults based on these beliefs that we establish at a very young age. So first we recognize they're there. And then we use hypnosis. So when you go into alpha theta brainwave state, critical area of the mind relaxes. It's kind of like the bouncer to the club, right? It decides what gets to come in. And we put that bouncer to sleep. So it gives us access. It gives us a door. And we go into that subconscious and we create, using imagery in hypnosis, we create knowns for new outcomes. How can I relate to food differently? How can I talk to myself differently? One of the things I use a lot is inner child work within hypnosis, reparenting our inner child.
How does that work, Brooke?
So how does the hypnosis part or the inner child work specifically?
The inner child part, how do you, because I understand the concept, but I just wondered how it actually works. I mean, do you talk someone through it, or is it something that someone does themselves?
Yes. So what we do is usually in each session, I have a conversation for about 30 minutes. We talk about each individual situation and what is the internal self-talk that's happening. What are you saying to yourself in these moments of like, okay, so I ate a slice of pizza or a whole pizza or whatever it is. And usually a common thing is like a lot of shame and guilt. Like, what were you thinking? How could you do this? Right. And then we spiral into this, forget it. I'm just going to eat like this for the rest of the month, and I'll wait till January 1 to start again. So it's that shame cycle and that internal self-talk that keeps you stuck in unhelpful habits. And so what we do is I'll put a client in hypnosis. They'll get into a very relaxed state. The critical area of the mind relaxes. You're tapping into that intuition, the subconscious mind. And then I guide them through an imagery journey of, moving down a hallway. We go through a door and there's a child, and the child looks like you when you were whatever age that comes to mind. We allow the client kind of develops their own, I guide them, but they bring up the imagery because it's unique to each person how old your inner girl is, or Russ, your inner boy, right? We all were a certain age. And usually when we react in certain ways or we're triggered, it's usually that inner child version of us. And then what we do is we offer that inner child the words that they didn't hear at the time that they needed, right? So I'm here for you. I love you. You're doing great. You have so much to offer the world exactly as you are. You don't need to do anything. Perfection is a big one. So reparenting the inner child. So you do that in a hypnosis journey. And then that's a practice that once you do that regularly, I use inner child work every single day now. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, what does my inner girl need to feel today? She needs to feel loved and cared for and supported. And a lot of times when it comes to health, when we have negative inner self-talk or self-loathing, we're going to abuse ourselves with the food that we put in our bodies and the way that we move our bodies, right? So the core of this is shifting the internal self-talk, really understanding how to care for yourself, how to love that inner child. And then every single choice you make about food and exercise becomes an act of self-care.
Brooke, this is many, many years of therapy, and this was one of my favorite therapists. Really spent time here, and she would say, I'd call her and I'd be like, I'm triggered. What do I do? She's like, okay, we'll get on the phone. And she's like, I'm so glad I'm talking to your 5-year-old self. How is he doing? Because you're not taking care of him as an adult. And it's that idea and that concept that you're allowing this child to run the show versus you as the adult running the show, and actually protecting that person because that person wasn't protected. And I think just seeing that and the way you described it, Brooke, is important for everyone, because if you can identify that you're allowing your inner child to run the show and not the adult part of you, then you've got some work to do to allow your adult to kind of take over. But it's such an important thing. And I wonder with like hypnosis though, like you're so vulnerable that it allows you to really tap into it and really find it.
Yes. And
But do you
it
remember it? Do
allows
you
you to
remember it?
really feel that healing. You're reparenting. Essentially what we're doing within our child work is trauma work. And trauma isn't, we all think like, witnessing like a natural disaster or some major horrible thing is trauma, but trauma is a spectrum. Trauma is anything that you weren't prepared to feel. If you are human, you have had trauma, right? We all have little things like little emotional experiences as a child that we kind of get stuck there. And those triggers come up as adults. And so we're learning to heal within. You're learning to do the internal emotional housekeeping. And then when you start to, builds confidence. And when you start to learn how to heal internally and do your own emotional housekeeping, then when it comes to food, you're able to separate the food from, a big thing is emotional eating, right? We use food as a response to an emotional need. And when you do that inner child work, you start to be like, oh, I have an emotional need right here. How can I meet the emotional need with an appropriate, like healthier coping mechanism than just turning to ice cream or turning to alcohol, right? And it's not that you'll never have ice cream again, and it's not that you'll never have a sip of wine again, but you're changing your relationship to it. So it's no longer the coping mechanism that you're relying on in order to respond to an emotional need. And one other thing I want to say, Russ, too, is like you make a really good point of like not letting the inner child run the show, but also let's just accept that there's a part of us that is an inner child. Like I think the hardest part for so many of us as adults is we all have a part of us that feels like that hurt inner child, but we spend our entire lives trying to act like, well, I shouldn't have this part of me that hasn't matured yet, right? We feel shame about that. And when we start to accept that there's an inner child there, it by default stops running the show, because we start accepting that it's there. It doesn't need to make itself so known, because we're starting to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and maybe integrate it rather than deny that we have it. I saw a brilliant drawing, actually. I don't know where it was. I think I was reading something on R.D. Laing, who was a total nutty psychiatrist from Scotland, but he had a drawing, I think, where you had like the child like still inside the adult body, and he was kind of saying it's still there. There's no point thinking that it's not there. It might have been him, or it might be someone else. But yeah, you're right. I think that is interesting. It's more about integrating that and letting yourself be a bit childish sometimes.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to have more joy and more love in your life.
Yeah, and play, of course, and all those other things that, you know, we do or did, depending on kind of how integrated you are. I mean, I'm interested from a bit of a geek's point of view, because while you're talking about all this brainwave stuff, I'm wondering if there's a kind of a time or a state that can get you into this mode more quickly. I mean, I've got loads of gizmos and devices that can modulate your brainwaves, for example.
Yes. So that's the other piece to this, is that hypnosis, again, we talked about how it happens naturally, but also other practices like yoga, meditation, these are all hypnotic modalities. Listening to binaural beats. When I do my own hypnosis, and you can practice self-hypnosis. I can teach you guys how. But what I do to supercharge that practice, and the way I teach my clients, is I pop in binaural beats. Okay? Because what you're doing is you're essentially confusing the critical area of the mind. You're confusing it so that it finally says, I don't really know what's going on here, so I'm just going to take a back seat. The big misconception about hypnosis is that you're going to go unconscious, and that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes people kind of slip in and out of sleep state, but a lot of times you stay completely conscious, but it's just that critical mind that goes to sleep. That area of the brain becomes less active. There is a psychiatrist at Stanford University. His name is David Spiegel. He's done tons of research on hypnotherapy. It's fascinating. So I definitely, recommend listeners, if they really want to geek out on this, to go check out David Spiegel. Just Google it. You can find, he's got a website. I think it's reverie.com. I'm not affiliated with it at all, but I think it's a fantastic resource. And as someone who started using hypnotherapy, I started just by listening on YouTube 7 years ago. And it started impacting my sleep. It started impacting I was a self-proclaimed like busybody. I didn't know how to slow down. I hated yoga because it was too slow. I was a collegiate athlete, so I needed to really essentially run my body into the ground in order to feel like I was getting any kind of peace or workout, any movement that I considered to be actually beneficial, until I started doing hypnosis. Then I started meditating. So I look at hypnosis as sort of like the gateway drug to meditation.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I like
Right?
that idea. Yeah.
It gets you into alpha theta brainwave state. And then when you tap into that space between the thoughts, it's like a jacuzzi for the brain. And that, once you can feel that, it's like, what a relief. I want to spend more time there. And the more you practice it, it's like going to the gym. You're running a neural pathway. You're accessing it. And the other piece to hypnosis that's really fascinating is that it activates parasympathetic. So you're just by getting into a state of hypnosis, you're calming all systems in the body. You're getting out of fight or flight. So it's a very effective way if you're dealing with anxiety. I know myself, like I went through a death in the family early in 2020, and I also had moved at that time, and I was having, for the first time in my life, little mini panic attacks. I was in a new job, and I would just leave my office. I'd go into my car, I'd put in headphones, and I'd put on a 15-minute hypnosis. And I'd take a deep breath, and then I'd go back to work. It's very powerful for just pulling you out of fight or flight.
Yeah. And Brooke, I think it's important that everyone understand the difference between meditation and hypnosis, because I meditate a lot. I've never been hypnotized. I'd love to be hypnotized, but like, what's the difference between the two?
So the difference is, and this is actually, this is a definition that I read that I love by another hypnotherapist, Grace Smith. She says, hypnosis is just meditation with a goal. So the big difference is that in the beginning of hypnosis, we use countdowns and eye fascinations to kind of tap you in, like walk that critical mind into that jacuzzi for the brain. So it gets you there quicker. Because a lot of times with meditation, people are like, well, yeah, I'd love to meditate. I sit down, but how do I actually do it? Right. So hypnosis kind of walks the brain, the critical mind down into that like calm space. It confuses it with countdowns and eye fascinations. And then once you're there, we use imagery with a specific goal. So we're creating a new known in the subconscious mind. Imagery is a massive part of this. So imagery is really powerful. The brain doesn't really know the difference between a memory and an actual experience. So when you're going through a really visual image, and by the way, I'll say some people will say, well, I can't visualize, and that's okay. It's about getting a sense, a feeling. So when I first started doing this work, I didn't visualize that well. I was more of a kinesthetic learner. So I could feel, okay, this is what it would feel like to be in this situation that I'm being guided through. The more I've practiced, the more my imagery now is very vivid. But when we go through imagery in the brain is firing neural pathways and it's creating changes in the brain. And there's something called procedural memory that you're moving the brain through so that when you go to actually experience something, it's like your brain's already been there. And that mind-body connection, when you create that change in the mind, it impacts the body. So like, for example, if you want to try it out right now, if you were to close your eyes and just put out your left hand and imagine a lemon in the left hand. So place that palm up and just imagine we've put a really ripe lemon in that hand. And when you can imagine if you picked it off a tree or you just got it at the supermarket, wherever you got your lemon is your choice. That's perfect. Now, just imagine that lemon is so ripe that when you squeeze it, it almost like spritzers juice. And I want you to bring that lemon up to your nose and your mouth and smell it. Feel the rind of the lemon. Get all the senses good. And now we're not going to peel it. We're just going to open our mouth and we're going to bite into the lemon. Yeah. Okay. Open your eyes. I see your faces.
Wow.
So just this simple imagery of that lemon, both of you made that face, that sour face. Your body responded like you were biting into a lemon. It probably released, the salivary glands probably released some saliva, but your body reacted sour. I'm experiencing sour. That's the power of imagery. So we create new knowns. What does it look like, feel like, smell like? What am I wearing? What are my feet? What's on my feet? What shoes are on my feet? How my clothes hang on my body when I'm lean, strong, fit, and I'm nourishing my body with nutrient-dense foods? How good does that feel? Do I feel energized? Do I feel motivated? Do I love waking up in the morning and going for a walk first thing in the morning and going out to see the sunlight? And do I love getting great sleep? So we get really detailed on what it feels like. And so the imagery creates emotion and then the body feels it. And at the end of the day, when it comes to health, we think we want a certain number on a scale, or we think we want to lose X amount of pounds. But really, what do we all want? We want to feel joy. We want to feel good. We want to feel energized. We want to live a really plugged in, tuned in life. And if you can get to that feeling now, then it doesn't matter what the number on the scale is. And then the number on the scale starts changing because you start feeling good every day. So when you feel great, you start to lose weight. And that's just like the byproduct.
What do you think is the impact between meditating by yourself and hypnosis, where kind of someone is guiding you through it? Because even you're a very charismatic person, you're saying, but how do you feel? I was like, yeah, I feel great, because I'm kind of feeding off of your energy there. What do you think that's one of the major differences, is that with hypnosis, you're being, it's out of yourself. It's not you doing it. You're kind of giving up control to someone else, even if it's momentarily for that session, or that even when you're doing it on audio.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't mean you can't practice self-hypnosis. Like if you have a really clear goal in mind and you know what you want to shift, you can do self-hypnosis. But the reason to work with a hypnotherapist is because we're doing subconscious work here. So chances are you're not conscious of the things that you're doing every single day that are sabotaging your health.
That's what I wondered.
And that's where it's really important to work with someone to say, hey, let's talk it out. And usually when I'm working with a client, I'm listening to their language. I can hear through their language what they're saying to themselves in their heads, right? How they're talking to themselves, the belief systems they have. We talk about family history. We talk about mom and dad's relationships to food and exercise. And what do you believe the block to be for you? Right? So we go through these conversations. The actual hypnosis portion is really only like 20 minutes, but we talk about what are the patterns that we're unconscious of. And then once you start to become conscious of those patterns, you can start to actively and consciously, with awareness, create change. So it's a little bit of both. I mean, I like to look at it as like a coach and an athlete's, it's training. I'm there to kind of guide and say, hey, let's flick the lights on and see all the things you might be doing to sabotage your health. And then you have to actually implement it. Right. So
There's and you mentioned college athletics, and I think there's probably another part of hypnosis, which is excellence, and actually like being able to build on top of something, and probably a little bit more of the advanced stages of how to use hypnosis. I have a daughter who plays basketball in college, and I constantly, she's so focused on mental health because she knows how important it is. She watches everyone crumbling around, the Kyrie Irvings and everyone that's just having mental challenges. What are some of those use cases where you use hypnosis to really kind of do advanced stage stuff?
oh, I love this question because I
This
I
is
grew up
Sarah's question, so Sarah, I'm sorry. This
okay.
is your question.
I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, where at the time lacrosse was just starting to boom, and it was becoming this thing where if you got your kid into a Division I school, their college education was paid for. And it became it was no longer just like excellence in sports. It was tied into money. It was tied into a lot of parents saying, this is my kid's ticket to an Ivy League school. And I laugh because I played field hockey and I played lacrosse, and I excelled in field hockey because there was less pressure. And I had a really hard time in lacrosse because everyone's yelling at you and everyone's upset about you drop the ball. And I was one of those, I had a hard time. There wasn't a focus on mental health at that time. This is like early 2000s. So what I know now to be true, and I love, Russ, that your daughter is focusing on mental health and understanding the impact of this. And it goes back to this conversation about that alpha brainwave state, that flow state. When you can tap into a state of total presence, which essentially is that hypnotic state, and that it's the critical mind that's the beliefs about what if I drop the ball? What if I miss it? What if I this? What if I that? It's usually it's got that negative bias, and that's part of our survival. It's the inner caveman or cavewoman, the primitive brain. That's the imagery I use around it in hypnosis. Cavewoman, caveman is trying to protect us from being cast out of the clan, because that's a survival thing. So don't say the wrong thing, right? Or from eating the poisonous berries, or from stepping on a snake that could kill us, right? So that negative bias is an attribute of the critical mind. And that, I think, is what comes into play, which can hold you back in sports or in excellence. And so when you can learn regularly to just calm that part of the mind, it becomes a muscle to start to relate to that voice differently and be like, oh, interesting. There's my cave woman. Just because she has a thought or an opinion doesn't mean it's true. And then transitioning into the state of presence. So like as a writer, you're practicing this already, like getting into a meditative state. Tap into that meditative state as you allow the writing to come through. With your daughter, I think a focus of just getting into a meditative, very present state, because hypnosis essentially is you're not asleep. You're just a hyper-focused, relaxed state. And that is when you're in the flow and you're firing on all cylinders and you're tapping into your intuition. So what separates us from our intuition is just I call it the noise of the world around us, the conditioning, and that's all critical mind. And when you can learn to transition from critical mind is poppity pop pop to total state of presence, that space between the thoughts. You can tap into, what does my intuition tell me? And when you're on the field hockey field, the lacrosse field, the basketball court, wherever, your intuition knows, your body knows, you talk about biohacking, your body knows before your critical mind knows what direction to move in any given situation. And so you're essentially tapping into intuition. The other thing I want to talk about here, and I think this is a big one for all sports, but especially women in sports and collegiate sports, whatnot, is a lot of us were taught to, mental toughness, push past the pain as athletes when you're training. And as adults, this really came into play for me. And I know, my sister was a Division I lacrosse player, and she ended up having knee surgery, and she had to stop playing. They said, you could either walk when you're 30 or you can play lacrosse now. And she played through that for an entire season. And so what happens is, as women, we learn to ignore what our body is telling us. We learn to numb out and push past it. And one of the things that I teach in my program with clients and the program Happy Body Blueprint that I created is how to reconnect and begin to trust your body again, because your body will tell you what it needs. But we all forgot how to listen. We've all been taught the opposite.
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, and we can talk about collegiate athletes. We could talk about writing. We could talk about just pure productivity and not sleeping because I have to stay up all night to study, or I have to stay up all night and get the work done. I'm going to grind it out. And I think we learn this with our sleep experts too, is that there's a time and place for productivity and to be in flow state. And there's a time and place to take care of yourself and to acknowledge that. So how do we balance that? And so there's two questions here. One is, how do you get into a flow state in a more productive, non-abusive way, right? There are many songwriters that talk about the amount of drugs they did, and Miles
Right.
Davis and right. But then there's also like, how do you then balance that out enough so that you can have a moment where you heal so you can get back to flow state later?
So I think the thing we need to remember again is that the critical mind has the negative bias. So for the most part, we're all operating on on one end of the spectrum, which is we're constantly in fight or flight. Most of us are stuck in fight or flight. And so I personally believe that the more you can practice calm state, parasympathetic, what you're never going to get to a point where you are stuck in calm. I think that's part of the human condition. So we need to work that muscle regularly. And what resistance to stress and resistance to that critical mind is, it's not that you'll get stuck without using the critical mind, right? What it is we want to learn how to transition between the two more quickly. That's what resistance is. That's what builds that's what makes somebody more resistant to stress. It's not that you'll never feel stress again. It's that you know how to transition out of stress and into calm, rest, and digest mode more quickly. And I think that our bodies originally knew how to do that. But now, because of modern life, and especially the last few years, we've been bombarded with, it was a scary time. There was COVID. There was messaging that was really scary. And we all just got stuck in fight or flight. And so I don't think there's any downside to practicing daily calm. But you also, what we talked about was suggestibility. You want the critical mind firing on all cylinders when you're taking in information. And one way to do that, what I teach my clients and this is something you can do at the end of a meditation too, is count yourself up and then label 3 things in your environment. So that fires, when you label, that fires an area of the brain that kind of wakes up that part of the mind. So I usually say after hypnosis, but also meditation, I'll say, I'll take my hands and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, eyes open, wide awake, and you can rub your hands together. That's why at the end of yoga, a lot of times they'll have you rub your hands and feet together and they'll say, come back into your body, because they're getting you out of hypnosis.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I'm a yoga teacher too, so I love to make these connections.
I do yoga, but I'm like you. I don't like this. Well, I'm like you used to be. I don't like the solo yoga, so I do Bikram just because it's fast paced. But I understand that that's not so much getting into that parasympathetic.
Yeah, it is though, because Bikram, there's a whole other side to yoga that's fascinating with parasympathetic and sympathetic, that you're working the nervous system with the forward folds and the back bends. So you're actually building resistance, because the entire class, you're going from fight or flight mode, which is heart open, back bend, to rest and digest in the body, which is forward fold.
You certainly feel relaxed afterwards, for sure. You know, after you've done 90 minutes of that in that hot room, you're zonked. So I love it, and I'm sure I'm getting the benefits. When I go to the yin ones, you know, where you're totally chill, I know I feel the benefit. We're coming to the end, so I wonder what tips can you give? I mean, one, I'm interested in, like, how do you pick the right hypnotherapist? You know, what was the thing you said when you started off, that you started listening to hypnotherapy?
Yes, so I actually just started by hopping on YouTube and finding a voice that I liked, because for me, it was all I wanted to do was sleep better and rest that critical mind. And once I realized how powerful it was, I couldn't believe it. The first time I did it, I was like, oh my gosh, that actually worked. Right? But from that point, you know, picking a great hypnotherapist, it's just like picking any therapist. And I know for myself, I do a free consultation to get to know somebody, to find out if my methodology resonates on both sides. I actually have a free workshop called How to Build a Body You Love with Hypnosis. So I'll share the link with you guys that you guys can share. And that kind of gives you a little more information. But also things like binaural beats can get you into that relaxed state. And then just, if you know what your goal is, if you're like, I just want to tune into my intuition more, or I just want to instate a new habit, you can actually get yourself listening to binaural beats. You can count yourself down from 10 to 0. So you turn on your binaural beats, you get into a comfortable position, count yourself down from 10 to 0, and just say 10, I'm going deeper and deeper. 9, I'm going deeper and deeper, all the way down to 0. And then visualize what we call a body scan. So you can just picture like a light going from the top of your body all the way through. And then that gets you into that really relaxed state. And then once you're there, visualize yourself moving through a new habit, or visualize yourself feeling really strong and lean. Get yourself to the emotion of your outcome. Okay. That's probably the biggest piece of advice I have, because if you can allow yourself to feel emotionally now better, then all of the behaviors are going to fall into place, because you're going to feel more motivated. You're going to take more action.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's helpful. Now I need to come out of my hypnosis from this episode.
Yeah. I do see clients all of my clients are via Zoom too. So if you ever want to try it, let me know, Russ and Sarah. We'll try it out. Yeah.
We'll have to do it separately, Sarah. There might be something we have to do apart.
Yes,
for sure.
You might have to separate for
this. Russ, at all.
No, not at all. You do not. You've met my little boy. That is not someone you want to hang out with too often. He needs he needs to be taken care of. Brooke, this was amazing. Thank you so much. Let's give people kind of your quick links. So to your website.
Yes, BrookeAnsleyWellness.com. And they can find me on Instagram at Brooke Ansley Wellness. So it's Brooke with an E, Ansley Wellness on Instagram. And then I've got my free workshop is linked on my Instagram page. You can drop me a message and I'll send it to you. So if you want to learn a little bit more, I think the workshop is great. It's a free training, and we go in depth about some of the things we talked about today.
And where do we go on Spotify to hear your songs?
Oh, my music. Okay. So warning, it's country pop.
It's fine.
My songwriting drastically changed when I stopped writing about whiskey and breakups when I started doing hypnotherapy.
Oh,
that's the thing.
But, what did you start writing about then?
Isn't that funny? Well, that's why as an artist, I've really started to transition. I've been focusing on hypnotherapy since then. But I think that's what makes me a hypnotherapist, is it's very musical. It's like songwriting when you're, But that's actually on Spotify under Brooke Ansley.
All right. We're going to be there. We'll create some playlists. Brooke, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Breaking the gray.